I was at my sister-in-law's house with my husband. We left her house around 7 or 8 o'clock p.m. We live a few blocks away, so we made it home within 5 minutes. I know I went to bed early, by 9 p.m. My husband goes to sleep around that same time. Fast forward, I awake at 1:30ish in the morning, right before the time change for daylight savings. Before I went to bed, there was some clothes drying in my dryer, so I go to take the clothes out and put more clothes from the washer in. It turns 2 a.m., and I notice that the clock jumps back to 1 o'clock. I'm thinking to myself, okay, time went back. I put the dry clothes on top of the dryer, but some of them fell onto the floor. I pick up a shirt from the floor, but it accidentally pulls at the dryer cord. As I lift the shirt up, the cord comes out of the wall and I see sparks. I go to plug the dryer cord back into the wall, but it doesn't fit. This is the weird part. The dryer outlet is somehow now a 3-prong outlet, but my dryer cord is a 4-prong. My husband woke up a little bit after that, and he saw me trying to plug in the dryer. I told him that the dryer cord won't fit into the socket. He then tries to plug it in himself and becomes as puzzled as I am. So now my dryer sits unplugged until we can get someone to come change the outlet to a 4-prong. So my first thought while reading this was that there was some kind of an adapter on the end of that dryer cord. However, this person actually looked all over the place for any kind of an adapter or anything else that would cause this to happen, and they found nothing. Alright, for this next one, I do want to preface with the fact that I'm pretty skeptical about ghosts or spirits or anything else. I know I've said that a million times, but with that being said, this makes for a pretty big coincidence otherwise. I'm not sure if one would consider this story scary per se. Depending on your outlook, you might even find it happy or bittersweet. Nonetheless, it is 100% true, and to this day, I'm still not sure what to believe or how to process how I feel about what happened. It was my friend's 19th birthday at the time, I'll just call her Gabby, and she wanted to have me and a few other friends over for a small party. It was nothing crazy, just our tiny friend group hanging out at her place and exchanging gifts we had prepared for her birthday. We had been up watching movies all afternoon until, for whatever reason, someone in our friend group suggested we use a Ouija board that Gabby had owned at the time. Now, in this particular friend group, we all happen to be a very secular, non-superstitious cast of characters, so meddling with potential spirits or demons using a Ouija board wasn't something we were concerned about. I never actually believed or took any of it seriously, but I still jumped at the opportunity to use the board just because it seemed like a fun time. I lit some candles to set the mood, and we laid the board in Gabby's unfinished basement. I was eager to start and see what would happen, so after we all set our hands on the compass in the middle, I decided to just ask the first question straight up. Is there a spirit or anything here with us? And to my and everyone else's surprise, the compass creeped to the corner of the board labeled yes. We were instantly dumbfounded and started accusing each other of tampering with the board or manipulating its movement somehow. But I think we were all silently aware that something like that would have been impossible. Since all of our hands were on the compass, we would have noticed if anyone among us influenced its direction. Someone in the group got too freaked out and left the room, but the rest of us kept communicating with the spirit. We stopped questioning the logic of what was happening and began asking the ghost some pretty lame yes or no questions, until someone wanted to figure out if it was related to anyone in the room somehow. So we asked, and when it answered, I was even more surprised to find out that the spirit claimed to be related to me in some way, on my mother's side. Now, I didn't and still don't know of many dead people in my family. I'm lucky enough to still have basically all my immediate and distant relatives alive and kicking. So when this board started telling me otherwise, my confusion and skepticism began to peak. We kept interrogating the ghost as a group, and through a long series of more yes or no questions, the information I was able to find out was that the spirit was male, he had died alone, he did not marry or have children in his lifetime, he supposedly was related to my grandmother in some way, he died from an overdose, and his initials were RM. Never in my lifetime did anyone ever mention my grandmother having a brother, and I have never once heard any mention of an overdose in our family. So these random facts and tidbits about some ghost really didn't impress or compel me too much when I heard them. I went home that same night and got in pretty late, but I caught my mom just before she was about to go to bed. She asked me how my night was, and before I mentioned anything even remotely related to the Ouija board, I asked her, "Did Granny ever have a brother?" She responded confused. "Uncle Rodney?" I was shocked to hear that not only did my grandmother indeed have a brother, but the first letter of the initials had actually matched. My mom continued to tell me unprompted how Rodney had died young due to an overdose, and that my grandmother didn't have the best relationship with him, so they rarely spoke. I didn't mention the fact that I spoke with my dead uncle over ghost text chat to my mom, but I still think about that night often. I wonder if what I even experienced was real, and if it was, why my uncle, who I have no emotional or personal connection to, felt like speaking to me that night. I wonder if he was protecting me, or just casually observing me from some type of afterlife. Maybe I should have asked him those things when I spoke to him. In my church, there's a discipline of attaching a metal chain to your ankle or wrist. In 2018, I did this practice, made my own chain, and threw that puppy on my ankle. Unfortunately, I went surfing about a week later and I lost the chain in the ocean. All this took place while I was visiting my grandma in Southern California. Fast forward to the crazy part. My wife and I were seated at the dining room table working on a puzzle with my grandma. I finished this stupid 3D puzzle and my grandma called our attention to a cabinet with other puzzles she had finished. My wife and I walk over to look, and my wife noticed something black on the red carpet. Being the husband that I am, I grabbed the black thing and threw it on her foot, pretending it was a bug or something. However, as soon as I tossed it on her foot, I noticed it was somewhat heavy. I immediately picked it up and started looking at it. I was shocked. It was the chain that I lost. I couldn't believe it. My grandma was shocked, and my wife was terrified. My grandma had just finished vacuuming earlier this morning. She would have seen the chain. Even then, for something to just be there for 4+ years is insane. I immediately put it on. Because of my background, I take this as a sign, but what the heck? It's crazy. I had to share. Yeah, agreed. That is pretty nuts. I mean, what is the most likely scenario here? That he had a false memory of losing the chain in the ocean? I can actually relate to this personally because over a year ago, I went to Hilton Head Island and I had these pink sunglasses. And I remember I just ran out into the ocean and completely forgot that I had them on and they just disappeared. I looked all over the place for those. I looked all through the sand everywhere and I found nothing. I guess my point is if they were to just randomly appear on the floor one day, I'd probably question everything. In October of 2020, I can't quite remember the exact date, but it was definitely around this time, I was laying in bed, trying to sleep. I had just visited some family in London, so while I was fairly tired, I wasn't completely exhausted, and there was no way I could have hallucinated the events of that night. I live near an airfield, so hearing planes fly is a common experience, and plenty of commercial flights fly over my house. Normal planes are easy to recognize, as they only make a small amount of noise and are tiny compared to the size of the sky. That night, as it got to around midnight, I started to hear what, at first, sounded like a plane, humming along in the distance. However, the sound kept growing louder and louder. It began to sound less like a plane and more like a helicopter with really loud rotor blades. I started to think that a plane was going to crash into my house, and I sat up in bed, suddenly quite awake as the rumbling of rotor blades kept coming towards me. Eventually, my bed was shaking, and I decided to look out of the window because I had never experienced anything like this before, and I was getting quite scared. I looked out at the perfect time and saw two strange, large, glowing green discs racing across the sky. They weren't part of the same craft because the one on the left was slightly faster, and it looked as if the two UFOs were racing almost. When I say they were larger than any plane and were very low flying, barely clearing the roof of my house. They cleared the sky in around 7 seconds, and the sound of the rotor blades disappeared with them. I asked my brothers the next morning if they had heard or seen the UFOs, and I scoured the news because there was no way I was the only person to have seen those things. Nothing. I could find no mention of anything like them anywhere. Every time I hear a plane go over my house and it flies a little lower than usual, I worry that the UFOs have returned. I look for planes that match the description to see if what I saw were just military vehicles, but again, nobody else has seen them. I have no idea if I saw actual aliens or just some secret aircraft, but it was clearly a troubling experience. This was about 7 years ago, and I honestly forgot it happened, likely for my own sanity, until someone made a comment about people who hide inside other people's homes. So this story likely has a rational explanation, but it's terrifying to know I'll never know the truth. I had recently moved into a tiny basement studio apartment. I was fresh out of a 6-year relationship, and it was my first time living alone. The apartment had bars over the 2 windows, and the door opened up to a busy city street. There was one spot on a wall that looked like it was once a window, but had been boarded up with a wooden door without a handle. A few weeks after I moved in, I got curious and tried opening the door. I couldn't get it to budge, and even had a guy friend come over and try. This thing wouldn't move in the slightest. Something about it weirded me out though. I ended up putting my bed right up against it, and shortly after, decided to tape a clear sheet of window sealer stuff to keep the draft out and make it feel less unsettling to me. I duct taped the sheet over the sealed up cutout and went about my day. The next morning, I went to work and came home as usual. I unlocked my door when I got home and was terrified. My bed had been pushed away from the wall and the taped up window seal had been removed. I went over to the cutout and the wooden door with no handle opened very easily. I was scared, but I looked inside. It was the size of a closet, was very dirty and dusty, and contained several wooden wheels, like from a horse-drawn carriage. Aside from that, it was empty. I immediately called the company I rented from, terrible company, and explained what happened and asked if someone came in to do maintenance or anything. They said no, so I asked if there was any possibility that a previous tenant could have had access. They basically told me I was crazy. It took over a month of harassing them to get them to change my lock. I never found out what that was all about. At the time, I guessed that an old tenant had money or drugs or valuables hidden in there that they came back for a literal day after I sealed it up, but now, I hate to think of it, but it's possible that someone was inside it all along. I can't imagine that somebody was like actually living in there because there's just too many things that they would have needed. They would have had to come out for food and water and all different kinds of things, so I find it pretty unlikely that that's what was going on here. However, the previous tenant theory seems to be the most likely in my opinion. It seems like the perfect place to hide something you wouldn't want anybody to find, so it seems to make sense. I guess we'll never really know for sure though, but side note, they did mention that a little while after this all happened, they found an unopened beer on their porch and drank it, so I don't know if that is somehow related to this or if that's just a weird coincidence, but felt I should throw that in there. This story has left me and my mom scratching our chins for many years now, and it affected her more than me. When I was around 11 or 12, I was living with my mom, stepdad, sister, and 3 other step-siblings. It was February of 2020. I was up late, around 2 or 3 a.m., doing God knows what, when I needed to use the bathroom. My room was right across from the bathroom, so it was just a straight shot. When I opened my door to go, I immediately felt a sense of dread and of not being alone. I was also at the beginning part of the hallway, so the other end was dark, almost like a void. When I stepped back out to get to my room, I saw something. A tall, dark mass just standing there, staring into my soul. I freaked the fuck out and quickly but quietly, it was like 3 a.m. at this point, ran into my room. The next morning, I told my mom of what happened. She didn't believe me at first. About a week later, the most unexpected thing happened. My stepfather saw it too, and the thing is, that was the day he died. Almost as if the presence was a messenger warning him of his demise. I'm 15 years old now, and I still don't have any answers. Dude, okay, these are the kinds of stories that keep me up at night. It literally sounds like these two interacted with like death itself. I'm sorry to hear about your stepfather, man, and I'm sorry you have to have this like weird memory attached to his passing. A couple of years ago, I lost a ring my grandmom got me for Christmas. I wore this ring 24/7 and rarely took it off. However, when I did take it off, I always put it in the same place so I wouldn't lose it. This ring meant a lot to me because, sadly, my grandmom passed away from cancer shortly after she gave it to me. One day, I remember looking down at my hand and starting to panic because the ring wasn't on my finger. Before getting really upset, I went and checked my usual spot where I put it, but it wasn't there. I remember telling my family and having them search the whole house. Anyways, I lost it a couple weeks before Christmas, so they told me they'd get me another. After they told me this, I went down to my basement to do my wash, and when I was putting my clothes in the dryer, I felt something hit my head and fall onto the floor in front of me. Lo and behold, it was my ring. It literally fell out of thin air. I told myself it was a little message from my grandmom, but it was one of the weirdest things. Still, to this day, I think about it. I had just gotten home from school, and I was on my way to the bathroom, specifically the upstairs bathroom. When I opened the door, a small bird started to fly over to me, but I slammed the door and got my mom, who was outside with my little brother. I told her that there was a bird in my bathroom, so she went to go get it out as safely as possible. She went into the bathroom with a towel before it flew out and into our hallway. We kept trying to get it, but unfortunately, we couldn't. We saw it go behind a bag that was left in the hallway, and it just vanished. There was no other place it could have gone. If it had flown my way and out the open door, then we would have both seen it, but it's like it just went through the wall or something. It wasn't just its disappearance that was weird though. I have no idea how the bird could have gotten into the bathroom in the first place. That door had been closed since I used the bathroom that morning. There's a window in the bathroom, but nobody can get it open, so there's no way it flew through the window. I just have no idea how it could have gotten in or out. It's so weird to think about. So this is a glitch in the matrix / paranormal sort of experience I had when I was little. I still don't understand it, and I know it happened because of my mom. When I was 7 or 8, I remember living with my mom in an old, rusted kind of rented building. It was gray and had this distinct blue stripe that went around the house. We were pretty poor at the time, so I didn't have toys or much of anything to play with besides dirt. It was around the time when fall changes into winter and it was freezing outside. The grass was all brown and it had just rained, so it was muddy and wet. I remember sitting there, digging a hole, looking for worms or whatever, when my mom calls me in. I turn around to face the building when suddenly, almost like within a long blink, everything changes. It's all saturated and the grass is super long. I remember barely being able to see over it. The house looked different. The stripe was gone and it looked freshly painted. The sky was clear and almost blindingly blue. I see on the back porch is what looks like me. I make eye contact with myself, but then the other me looks away at my mom in the doorway. She looks shocked, looking at me and then at the other me. She screamed at me to get inside, and I jet for the door, and right as I'm climbing up the stairs, everything goes back. I still can't understand what happened that day, but I remember it vividly. I reached out to the person who sent me this to confirm that their mom saw the same thing that they did, and yeah, their stories completely line up. They both saw the exact same thing that day, so what could have caused this? Me and my coworker were apparently in the same room at the same time, but neither of us saw each other. This happened a few years ago, back in 2018-2019. Because of scheduling issues, me and my coworker had to take our breakfast earlier than everyone else. I work in a factory with 2 places to eat, a cafeteria and a generic break room for employees. To reach the break room, you have to walk up a flight of stairs that leads directly to it. Anyhow, when we were both told to take breakfast, I started to walk up the stairs, eat my breakfast, and browsing on my phone all alone as you do. I just assumed my coworker went to the cafeteria to eat. After my half an hour was up, I went down the stairs and waited for him right at the bottom to show up. And that's when I see him come down the stairs as well. He asks me if there was anything good in the cafeteria today. I responded by saying, "No, I ate in the break room." And he said, "No, you didn't. I was there all alone." And I said, "Yeah, me too." We sort of just looked at each other until he eventually said, "Huh." We didn't really have time to think about it after that because of work, but at lunch we both ate in the break room again, and I asked him if this was the room he was in. He responded, "Yes." I occasionally think about the event when the subject of glitches in the Matrix comes up. My coworker seems to have completely forgotten the event or just doesn't care, or maybe he thinks I was messing with him. Okay, we're definitely gonna have to reconvene after this one. This has to be one of the most insane stories I've ever been submitted directly, and sadly this person has no name and no other contact information attached, so it's impossible for me to reach out for any comment, but just wait till you hear this. For some context, back in 2018, I had been dating this guy, Jaden, for around a year and a half. One late, dark night after a date at the movies, we were driving home on an unlit road through the woods, with the only light coming from his car's headlights. Jaden and I were just talking and the car ride was extremely normal until this huge flash of light jumped at us from in front of the car. It was so bright that it looked like another car was literally right on top of us, and it took up my entire field of vision. Jaden immediately slammed on the brakes, but the mysterious light already disappeared. We just looked at each other, trying to understand what had just happened. After a moment, Jaden told me to stay in the car as he exited from the driver's side. He called out, but nobody answered. The light couldn't have been from a streetlight because the road was completely dark. It wasn't another car either. Jaden opened the car door and grabbed a flashlight from the glove box, telling me that he was going to take a small look around in the woods that lined the sides of the secluded road. I was still in shock, so I just agreed and told him to be careful. After he disappeared into the woods for a few minutes, I started to feel this overwhelming sense of dread in my stomach. Something was very, very wrong, like I was in a place that I shouldn't have been. I sat there, more terrified than I've ever felt in my life, until Jaden opened the driver's side door and climbed into the car. Without saying a word, he sped away from there. When I looked at him, he was pale and covered in sweat, his eyes wide. I tried to ask what had happened, but he remained silent. I could tell he was shaking and gripping the steering wheel very hard. As soon as we got out of the woods, he exhaled deeply and said that he loved me. The remainder of the car ride was silent. He wasn't at school the next day or the days after. His family's house was up for sale within the week. Apparently they had moved away to another state and I never saw him or his family again. Jaden had blocked my number and email address, so I couldn't contact him. I, to this day, have no idea what happened in the woods that night, what the light was, or what Jaden saw in the forest. I haven't spoken about this to anyone. It sounds crazy to even type it out. Needless to say, I don't drive on that road anymore. I really wish this person would have left me some kind of contact information or anything so I could have tried and verified this story. I also have like a ton of questions, but either way, I guess we'll never really know the specifics behind this one. Just a little warning, this story contains discussion of anorexia. Preface: a little over a decade ago, I was married to a man and in the throes of a struggle with anorexia, which, in hindsight, I think was inflamed by my inability/refusal to look at the fact that I'm gay. Needing to believe that staying in my marriage was the right thing to do, I began obsessing over a very specific and unusual ring I wanted for a vow renewal. I hadn't gotten a ring the first time. This was a quantum or fantasy-cut mystic topaz in white gold. That's important. Just to stress the point of how strange a ring it was, I used to work in fine jewelry and I never saw one like it come through my store. Fast forward 10 or so years, past my reconciliation with my sexual orientation, my coming out, my recovery from anorexia, and marrying a woman, to June of last year. I was preparing to go on a camping trip with my wife and 2 friends, and was getting a couple loads of laundry done before we had to leave. I heard something rattling around in the dryer, but naturally assumed it was a quarter or a button or something. When the cycle was done, I went to retrieve the clothes, and as soon as I opened the door, something fell onto the floor. A 3-carat quantum fantasy cut mystic topaz ring in 14-carat white gold. Incidentally, it is 3 sizes too small. I have turned this around in my brain so many times, examining it from every possible angle. The specificity of it is something I've never been able to get over. This is the kind of ring you have made custom, and it fell out of my f***ing dryer. Though my wife thoroughly believes it to be pure coincidence, I can't accept that. It's too weird. So as you can see from the pictures they attached, this is a very unique ring, plus this person worked in fine jewelry, so I find it very unlikely that they mistook this for a different ring. I'm interested to see if you guys have any sort of a theory for this one. If you do, leave it down below, because this just makes absolutely no sense to me. This happened to me maybe 6 years ago, when I was 14 to 15. My dad's work friend has a couple acres of land on the outskirts of the suburbs of Chicago. He would host big parties on his land that my family would attend. The kids got free reign of the land. We were allowed to go wherever we wanted as long as it was within his property line. There were fields of wheat, a forested part, and even a small stocked pond. We would run around, play yard games, and fish, but the best, most fun thing to do was ride the golf cart. My dad's friend has souped up this ancient golf cart with a better engine so it could go pretty fast. And being one of the oldest kids, I was allowed to drive it. We would load as many kids as we could on it and make loops around the fields and pond. I was driving around the property line one more time before it got too dark after dropping the kids off at the house. I was on the farthest spot away from the house, where the forest and fields meet, when I spotted a deer around 20 feet in front of me, standing in the middle of the path. There was no room to go around it, so I slowly drove closer to it. It didn't move, and when I flicked on the headlights, I noticed it was staring directly at me. Its big black eyes stared straight into me and freaked me out a bit. There was something off about the deer, like it was smarter than a normal deer. I kept creeping forward, and it wouldn't move, so I decided I would turn the cart around. I had to do a multiple point turn to get around the narrow path, but I sped off once I did, only looking back once to see the deer on its hind legs, presumably still staring at me, backlighted by the fading sunset. I floored it back to the house and told everyone at the party. No one believed me. To this day, whenever I see a deer, I get the chills a bit. When I was a junior in high school, around the age of 16 or 17, I was going out to celebrate my birthday with my family at a local Applebee's. I remember it taking place on a Saturday night and going out with only my little brother and father since my mother was on a business trip. Before I left my house to go there, I remember taking my AirPods with me so I could listen to music in the car and while I wait for my food. During the ride there, I explicitly remember opening my AirPods and seeing both of my AirPods in the case. I put them in, only to have one of them slip out and fall in the crack between 2 seats. This annoyed me, but I figured I could just check between the seats once we got to the restaurant. Once we get there, me, my brother, and my father all get out our flashlights and look in between the crack, underneath the seats, and in any other open spaces near the seat to check and see if the one AirPod I had missing could be found anywhere. We searched for about 15 minutes straight, but couldn't even see a glimpse of it. My father told me the next morning we would remove the seat to check and see if the AirPod completely went underneath because we couldn't see it from the angles we were looking at. I agreed and went inside the restaurant to make the most out of my birthday. After driving back from the restaurant, I went to sleep since it was pretty late. The next morning, I kid you not, the AirPod I had lost was tucked in my hand underneath the pillow I slept on. What the fuck? I immediately go to my dad to ask him if he had gotten up early and removed the seat himself. He was still asleep alongside my brother. When he woke up, I asked him and he said he had never taken out the seat and was just as taken aback as I was. My brother couldn't have done it since he doesn't know a rat's ass about removing car seats, nor does he have the car keys. To this day, I still think about how that AirPod was somehow removed from beneath the seat, taken out of the car, got into my house, wound inside my bedroom, and inside of my hand. I can't think of a single explanation. This happened just before Christmas 2019, and I guess it popped into my mind again recently due to it being Christmas season. So, in December 2019, I was traveling by train back to my hometown. When I arrived at the train platform, I started walking towards the ticket machines. As I approached, there was an attendant standing by the machines. As soon as he turned and saw me, he loudly said to me, "Well, finally, you're here. I've been waiting 30 years for you to show up." I thought that was a very weird thing to say, especially since I was only 21 at the time. At a guess, the attendant was in his 50s. The way he said it was very happy and sincere, not sarcastic or even in a joking tone. Unfortunately, I was very shy and awkward, so I didn't ask what he meant. I wish now that I had. Then he asked if he could help me with anything, so I asked him to help me buy a ticket, as I had never used the ticket machines before. As I was buying the ticket, he kept making really intense eye contact and looking at my face as if he recognized me and was trying to figure out if I was who he thought I was. I had only moved to the area 3 months before and have no family there, so he couldn't have mistaken me for an older relative of mine. I had definitely never seen him before, and it was my first time taking the train. Throughout the interaction, he asked me, "Are you going on another business trip?" Again, I was confused because I was clearly a 21-year-old student, not a businesswoman. I feel I should say he wasn't creepy at all and definitely wasn't hitting on me. He was well-spoken and clearly not intoxicated. So here's the glitch. After I bought my ticket, he picked up my suitcase and walked me to the train, which was very kind of him. As I stepped into the train, he placed my suitcase next to me. I turned to thank him, and he was gone. It was like as soon as he let go of my suitcase, he vanished into thin air. There was practically no one else around, so he didn't disappear into a crowd or anything. I glanced all around and couldn't see him anywhere. He definitely didn't get on the train with me and wasn't anywhere on the platform. If he had run off, I would have heard his footsteps, and there wasn't enough time for him to disappear from sight even if he was running. The whole situation felt so strange. Not paranormal exactly, but surreal. Maybe I should mention that even though I was in university, I've never been drunk or tried drugs, and I wasn't sleep deprived.